future of air combat is almost here. Boasting supercruise and stealth, America's F-22 Raptor is leading the way. But the Europeans aren't far behind. Russian pilots look to redefine aerial combat, arousing awe and fear with heart-stopping maneuvers. But computers have already taken the next step. In the cockpits of the 21st century, brainwaves, three-dimensional sound, and virtual controls will break the barriers between man and machine. With technologies that draw from the realm of science fiction, the fighters of tomorrow will push the limits of body and mind. In 1916, German ace Oswald Bohlke outlined the first rules of aerial combat. Much has changed since World War I, but his immortal words still apply. Get into a superior position before the adversary, and you'll win the fight. The era of modern combat has been shaped by years of Cold War. 40 years of competition, with both sides trying to gain the edge. The F-86 Sabre was flown to Korea to check the scourge of the MiG-15. America's mighty XB-70 Valkyrie frightened the Russians into building the MiG-25 Foxbat. The Foxbat's blistering speed made such an impression, America pulled its best and brightest to create the ultimate jet fighter. The F-15 Eagle is the preeminent fighter aircraft in the long procession of cold warriors. For years, it ruled the skies, but today, challengers from Europe and Russia have stripped it of its crown. In the 21st century, U.S. Air Force planners want the best fighter sitting in their corner. Today, years of research and millions of man-hours are put to the test. Pilot Paul Metz is no stranger to wild rides. In Vietnam, he flew F-105 Wild Weasels, earning 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses and 6 Air Medals. Now his job is taming the Air Force's newest bird of prey, the F-22 Raptor. The first flight of any aircraft is a pass-fail exam. For the U.S. Air Force, the stakes are enormous. The F-22 has been more than a decade in the making. The brightest minds in the aerospace industry were pooled to make the most advanced aircraft ever to see the light of day. Air Force planners aren't looking for a fair fight. They expect the F-22 to be so far ahead of the competition that even when vastly outnumbered, American pilots will rule the sky.
The F-22 is going to perform the most important mission that the Air Force performs for our country, which is provide air dominance over future battlefields. Over many years, our forces have enjoyed success on the battlefield because they had technological superiority over their foes. This airplane is going to provide us with that technological dominance, which translates into military dominance over future battlefields.
This is Russian test pilot Yevgeny Frolov. Frolov flies for the Sukhoi Design Bureau here at the Zhukovsky Airfield, 30 miles outside Moscow. He flew for the Red Air Force and in his spare time enjoys aerobatics. Today, he's flying one of Russia's most talked about fighters, the Su-37.
The Su-37, which you see behind me, is very easy to control, very smooth, clever, and behaves like a gentleman.
Actually, the Su-37 behaves like no other aircraft in the world. Although it looks like its predecessor, the Su-27, the new Russian fighter has one important difference.
On this airplane, the nozzles move up and down. When both nozzles move up and down, it changes the angle. When one nozzle goes up and the other goes down, and it is standing on its tail, it can perform a pirouette.
Yevgeny Frolov has flown the Su-37 many times. For him, today's flight profile is part of a routine. But for the casual observer, it's a sight to behold. The ability to move the exhaust nozzles in flight is called thrust vectoring. During a dogfight, such moves can be a deadly surprise. During a display, it's breathtaking entertainment. Thrust vectoring isn't new. The Europeans know how to do it, and the Americans have built it into the F-22. But the Russians have perfected it. One of Frolov's standard maneuvers is the Super Cobra. Here, Frolov sits the plane on its tail and turns. Another is the post-stall loop. Here, Frolov pulls back on the stick during forward flight. Instead of going skyward, the nozzle propels him through an abrupt loop while the plane maintains forward momentum. At one point, Frolov is actually flying backwards in controlled flight. And now the view from the inside. In aerospace circles, this type of flying is called super-maneuverability. Some experts claim that aside from entertaining crowds at air shows, it has little use. After all, true dogfighting went out with the Korean War. In today's impersonal world of air-to-air missiles, victory or defeat is decided long before a pilot sees the enemy. At least, that's the idea. Whatever the case, the U.S. Air Force isn't taking any chances. Super-maneuverability is here to stay, and for the pilots of the future, it's going to take getting used to.
When you're flying the Su-37 at low speeds, it feels more like you're flying an aerobatic plane. Everything changes very quickly. For example, the speed display shows 0, and the angle of attack display or horizon indicator are moving so quickly the pilot can't refer to it. So I stay oriented by looking out of the canopy. It's just like flying aerobatic planes, which I did for a long time.
Well, the F-22 will bring 3 essential capabilities to the future battlefield that will allow us to be dominant as a nation. One, of course, is stealth.
The Air Force already has stealth, but not in a fighter. One is a long-range bomber, the B-2, and the other is the F-117 Nighthawk. Despite its F designation, the Nighthawk would never survive a dogfight. Its only job is night attack. The Air Force's mighty F-15 Eagle has the speed and agility to match the best the world has to offer, but it stands out on radar screens. The F-22 achieves stealth without compromising speed or agility. Much of its technology is a closely guarded secret. But even to the layman, certain design features are obvious. All of the leading edges, seen here on the engine intake, then the wings, and finally the tail, sweep back at exactly the same angle. The F-22 won't hang missiles off the wing. Everything will be tucked neatly away until it's time to shoot. One of the most reflective parts of any fighter is the spinning blades of its jet engine. On the F-22, the engine is hidden behind the curvature of the intake. A simple, stealthy answer.
The F-22 will allow us to dominate the battlefield 24 hours a day because it will have F-15-like maneuverability and F-117-like stealth. So putting those two together is a revolutionary development.
The F-22 has been a long time coming. As far back as 1981, the U.S. Air Force laid out a requirement for a new fighter to replace the F-15. By 1987, the Lockheed team settled on a shape, and the prototype YF-22 was born. On September 29, 1990, test pilot Dave Ferguson taxied down the runway in Palmdale, California. In 3 years, aircraft designers had taken a quantum leap forward. They had built an airplane with the speed and moves of a fighter, but virtually invisible to radar. It would be able to fly beyond the speed of sound for prolonged periods of time, and if needed, push beyond Mach 2. The YF-22 was one of the greatest aeronautical achievements in history. But there was little time to celebrate. The first flight would be to nearby Edwards Air Force Base, where the YF-22's competitor awaited its arrival. The Air Force was preparing a showdown. Sitting in an open hangar at Edwards, the Northrop YF-23 sat poised for battle. At first glance, the YF-23 looks like no other fighter. Its wide-set tail fins and humped fuselage add to its unusual appearance. But like its competitor, the YF-23 was designed for stealth. It had no right angles, and the engines were hidden within the contours of the intake. Capable of flying beyond twice the speed of sound, it was a worthy opponent to the YF-22. The stage was set for a showdown between the two most advanced fighters ever built. The stakes were immense. The winner would emerge as the air superiority fighter of the 21st century. The loser would leave empty-handed. High above the Mojave Desert, the two fighters flexed their muscles. Speeds approached Mach 2, and maneuvers seemed to defy gravity. Pilots fired a range of missiles, pulled high G-turns, and tapped fuel from aerial tankers. The results of the competition remain classified, but it's clear that the two fighters were well matched. The Air Force faced a difficult decision. The YF-23 was the faster of the two aircraft, and it had the stealth that the Air Force was looking for. But it was the YF-22 which captured the hearts and minds of military planners. At the end of April 1991, the Air Force announced the winner. The future of air combat had made its debut. On the tarmac of the Royal Air Force's Flight Test Center outside of London, the future has already arrived. Enter the Eurofighter 2000, the RAF's next high-performance fighter. As its name implies, the Eurofighter was designed by a European consortium. The project dates to the early 80s, when Germany, Italy, Spain, and Britain combined their resources to build a common defense fighter for Europe. After years of give and take, a design has emerged that is the shape of things to come. The Eurofighter is a single-seater with a modified delta wing. Directly behind the aircraft's nose is a pair of winglets, or canards, which give the pilot better maneuverability and low-speed handling. Eurofighter was designed to enter service early in the 21st century for the defense of a new generation. Men and women dedicated to the unified European alliance. But one major player is conspicuously absent from the Eurofighter consortium. In 1985, France left the program, forging ahead on its own. To France, the Eurofighter had one important shortcoming. It couldn't fly off a ship. To fulfill this goal, the aerospace company Dassault built a single-seat fighter called Rafale. Like the Eurofighter, the Rafale features a delta canard design, meaning it has a set of winglets up front to help the pilot fly in ways that would stall conventional fighters. This is the naval version, the Rafale M. Like all naval fighters, its landing gear is rugged enough to survive repeated impact with a ship. As this new fighter goes into service, it will be joined by a new aircraft carrier. Named for the man who embodied French independence, the Charles de Gaulle will be the only nuclear-powered carrier outside the United States. Since the Battle of the Coral Sea, naval air power has played a vital role in American defense. In every armed conflict, from Korea to the Gulf War, the carrier has been the first to arrive on the scene. In the early 21st century, the Navy looks to replace its aging fleet of F-14 Tomcats. The F-22 may be America's 21st century fighter, but not for sailors. In the design of a Navy fighter, every detail is influenced by the rigorous demands of flying on and off a ship. So the Navy took a less radical leap forward. Instead of starting from scratch, naval planners decided to take an existing plane and make it bigger. Enter the F-18E and F, the Super Hornet. The Super Hornet's engines are a third more powerful than a standard F-18. The fuselage is almost a yard longer, and the wing has an extra 100 square feet. It can carry a third more fuel, and each wing has an additional pylon to carry weapons. It may look like an F-18 Hornet, but the capability it brings to the aircraft carrier is entirely new. The Super Hornet has 40% more range than the standard F-18. And although it's bigger, it's harder to see on radar screens. The intakes were redesigned to match the angle of the wing, and some of the sharper edges were sprayed with radar-absorbent material. But it's easier to make a stealth fighter for the Air Force than for the Navy. Features like the tailhook make good reflectors, and although engineers worked to make it less visible, the Navy didn't want to tamper with the already difficult job of landing on a ship. The Navy's goal was to buy 1,000 Super Hornets between the turn of the century and 2015. But in an era of fiscal austerity, its toughest battles may be fought at home. The key to saving money is building a fighter plane which can be used by all branches of the military. This is the goal of a program called Joint Strike Fighter. The requirement is straightforward. Build a single-engine aircraft that's both stealthy and supersonic. The hard part is making it flexible enough to please the Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps, not to mention Britain's Royal Navy. The U.S. Marines like to keep their planes near the battlefield. Their runway often consists of nothing more than a clearing in the woods. This version will be able to take off in extremely short distances, hover, and even land vertically. The Royal Navy will use the same model to fly from its small aircraft carriers. For both the Marine Corps and Britain's Royal Navy, the Joint Strike Fighter will replace the Harrier jump jet. To satisfy this need, engineers again are faced with the challenge of making a plane that can behave like a hummingbird. Boeing and Rolls-Royce have settled on an approach they call direct lift. To hover, the engine exhaust is redirected downward at the center of gravity. It uses swiveling nozzles, a simple approach which made the Harrier succeed where many others had failed. Engineers at Lockheed have a different idea. To provide lift, they've installed a fan behind the pilot's seat. The fan is powered through a shaft which connects it to the engine in the back. During forward flight, the fan is shut down and the air is forced out the back. Perhaps the most interesting proposal came from a joint US-British design study. British Aerospace and what was then McDonnell Douglas unveiled their Joint Strike Fighter concept in the summer of 1996. The design seemed normal, except for one thing. It didn't have a tail. At least it didn't have a tail like any other plane around. An airplane's vertical fin is what gives it stability during flight. By using horizontal tails instead, the US-British Joint Strike Fighter was lighter and stealthier than conventional planes. It also promised to be far more nimble than conventional fighters. But in aviation, nothing is gained without a cost. The tailless design was highly unstable. Engineers sought to overcome this with a unique approach. They would harness the thrust of the engine to keep it under control. When the plane began to lose control, the engine nozzle could vector the exhaust up, down, or side to side to keep the plane on the right track. The tailless Joint Strike Fighter was radical. In fact, it was too radical for the Defense Department. At the end of 1996, the idea was abandoned. But lately, a similar concept has re-emerged. Not as a fighter, but a small experimental plane called the X-36. At first glance, the X-36 looks like the canceled Joint Strike Fighter, but actually, it's even less conventional. Not only does it lack a vertical tail fin, it's got no tail at all. The X-36 is formally known as the Tailless Fighter Agility Research Aircraft, a program funded jointly by NASA and private industry. The goal: design a prototype fighter with little drag, unmatched stealth, and gut-wrenching agility. The X-36 program isn't the first time NASA has explored bizarre designs in search of maneuverability. During the 80s, they flew the X-29, which had forward-swept wings. The idea is simple: make a fighter inherently unstable, and it will be able to move in ways nothing else can. With the X-36, engineers sought to prove that a radical shape could actually work in the air. But this time, they didn't have the money to spend on a full-size aircraft. So instead, they built one that was only a quarter the size. The X-36 is 19 feet long and only 3 feet high. Power comes from a small Williams turbofan engine. Fully fueled, the X-36 weighs about 1,300 pounds. The X-36 won't have a pilot, at least in the conventional sense. It's flown from a virtual cockpit back on the ground. Here, the pilot looks at the computer-generated image on the horizon. On May 21, 1997, the X-36 took off from Rogers Dry Lake at Edwards Air Force Base, California. As the X-36 broke ground, NASA engineers knew they had a controllable plane. From his virtual cockpit, NASA pilot Larry Walker took the X-36 up to almost 5,000 feet. The plane handled so well, he decided to try out a couple of rolls. NASA engineers scoured through data as it was transmitted back in real time. From his virtual cockpit, Walker again pulled up the nose and carried out a quick roll. The X-36 may be the shape of things to come. Using split ailerons and thrust vectoring instead of a tail gives a fighter better stealth and maneuverability. But there's something else about it that some military planners find interesting. Here, NASA uses a virtual cockpit because the X-36 is just a model. But future full-size combat planes may be flown the same way. A pilotless fighter could fly at G-forces beyond the physical limits of a human. And more importantly, no one's life is put at risk. The pilot would fight enemy planes from the safety of a virtual cockpit, hundreds or even thousands of miles away. The idea is controversial, but as technological barriers continue to fall, the only thing standing in the way of the pilotless fighter may be the pilots themselves. The F-22 Raptor was designed for stealth. All of its missiles and fuel tanks will be carried inside, hidden away from enemy radar. But stealth is just part of the equation. The other is speed.
It will give us what we call supercruise, an ability to cruise at high supersonic speeds for a sustained period of time. Today's airplanes can't do that. They can go real fast, but when they're doing it, their gas gauge is going like that. In this airplane, we'll be able to sustain those high speeds, 1.5 Mach and above, for a prolonged period of time. So that allows the airplane to get to the fight quicker, get out of the fight quicker, and it enhances its opportunity to win when engaged with opposing airplanes.
But the F-22's engine doesn't just make it fast. It can redirect thrust, letting pilots fly like no other Air Force fighter before it. In 21st century combat, the Air Force hopes that enemy fighters will never even get close to their F-22. But if they do, American pilots will be able to turn on a dime. Back in 1990, the prototype F-22 was put through a series of tests to explore AOA, or angle of attack. Because the engine can redirect exhaust up or down 20 degrees, pilots can fly at speeds and angles which would stall a normal fighter. Test pilots showed that the YF-22 could stay under control even when pointing skyward 60 degrees. For Russian test pilot Yevgeny Frolov, this kind of flying is nothing new. His Sukhoi 37 is the most maneuverable fighter around. From a distance, Frolov has watched the F-22 evolve. He's impressed by what he's seen. In speed and stealth, the Americans are difficult to match. But in the field of super-maneuverability, the Russians continue to lead the way.
The information I have on the F-22 shows me that we are a bit ahead of the Americans when it comes to thrust vectoring, because we've performed with our plane before and done much research.
But the Americans aren't too far behind. In the mid-1990s, engineers from Lockheed Martin and General Electric put a special nozzle on the back of an engine. The engine was then put into an F-16 fighter and taken to Edwards Air Force Base for flight tests. In the F-22 and Su-37, engine nozzles can be directed up and down. This engine pushes the exhaust up and down as well as side to side. It's called the MATV, multi-axis thrust vectoring. High above the Mojave Desert, pilots guided the F-16 through an aerial ballet of extreme maneuverability. One of the moves is called the helicopter. Here, the pilot pulls the fighter through a controlled flat spin. The goal is to keep the nose pointed towards an enemy fighter, no matter where it goes.
What kind of slick is it taking right past?
It's starting to turn now, looking good.
As the F-16 spirals earthward, the camera plane has trouble just staying close.
This is sweet.
Looking good.
Man, we came right back around on him.
A wild way to look at another airplane.
Passing 21.5, 72 Alpha.
20.
Another maneuver is called a post-stall loop. Pilots call it the hammerhead. First, the pilot points the plane skyward. Then he rotates the pitch axis about its center of gravity. At one point, the F-16 is actually flying backwards in controlled flight.
Clear to maneuver.
Easy on the pull. Maybe a little slow. Now. Yes.
But that one was nice.
Extreme maneuverability takes getting used to. For a fighter pilot, acceleration and high G-turns are one thing. Flying backwards and stopping on a dime are something else. This is the multi-axis centrifuge at the Air Force's Armstrong Laboratory in Dayton, Ohio. Here, the body is subjected to the future of air combat. Sitting in the hot seat is First Lieutenant Omar Vicken. Like many volunteers, Omar isn't a pilot, but today, he's going to get the ride of his life.
I know that this is going to be difficult, but what we'd like for you to try to do is initially stay relaxed, no straining, until you have.
Sitting in the control room are Air Force doctors and physiologists. Their job is to explore the limits of the human body. Omar's job is to stay awake.
The straining maneuver.
Got it. Okay.
When I'm spinning 5G, 6G, 7G, you will notice your vision start tunneling in, disappearing. And my goal in the centrifuge as I'm spinning is to push that vision back out by straining.
As Omar's body is hurtled in a clockwise direction, blood begins to drain from his head. As the blood leaves, so does his vision.
Well, the way I fight off the effects of the G-forces is a full G-strain maneuver, which looks something like this. The whole purpose behind doing that is to force the blood from the lower extremities and upper extremities back into the heart so blood can be pushed into my head. because as I'm spinning, the blood is all draining. If you do not do that, you'll go into what's called G-lock, G-induced loss of consciousness. Your signal is that as your vision is tunneling in, you're losing more and more blood, and you will eventually just go out. You'll go to sleep for a little while.
The vision almost came all the way. Had just a little pinpoint there. But I pushed it back out and I had full vision on top.
We're interested in going ahead and doing a negative 1G to 8, but we don't want you to have to wait this time. We want you to go ahead and strain as soon as you think you need to. If you lose all vision, make sure you hit the B-stop.
Got it. Okay.
This time, Omar will start spinning at negative 1G. In other words, he'll be upside down.
Woohoo! Oh.
Arm's gonna rotate.
Okay.
As the centrifuge accelerates, the sensation of sitting upside down is overcome by a much larger force, which is pinning him to the back of his seat. Although his feet are above his head, the forward motion begins to push the blood back to his legs.
You feel your tissue kind of being compressed and pushed down, but at the same time, the blood is draining from your head.
3, 5.
This time, something goes wrong. At the verge of passing out, Omar hits a button which alerts the control room he can't take anymore. The centrifuge slows to a halt. After Omar catches his breath, it's time to find out what happened.
Sorry, I lost concentration.
There's no need to apologize. Just tell us what happened.
I put my feet underneath, and I was putting them back on top, focusing on that. And I just got way behind my breathing. Everything went out. Just like that. I couldn't even get it. I tried for a second to get it on top, but there was no way. It was all black. I don't even know what G it was, but it just went all black.
You got all the way up to 8.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
You have to do so many things while you're spinning that it's very difficult to fly and fight. I gained a new respect for the fighter pilots and what they have to do since spinning in the centrifuge.
Not far from the centrifuge is another kind of laboratory. At first glance, the large dome with padded framework appears to be a set for a bad science fiction movie. Actually, it's used to explore a concept called three-dimensional sound. A large dome-shaped framework is adorned with 272 speakers. The subject sits in the middle. Today, she's a civilian named Karen White. The idea is simple. One of the speakers makes a sound. It's the subject's job to decide where it came from. A small red light confirms her choice.
Future technology is going to make aircraft communication systems capable of reproducing sound in the headsets, not just within your head, but at some particular location out in space. Such as, for example, if an incoming missile is coming towards your aircraft, you would get a warning that not only says that there's a missile coming, but the warning sound is located in space from approximately where the missile's coming from, so you can direct your eyes there, or you can, even without directing your eyes there, perhaps you can initiate an evasive maneuver.
In fact, experiments show that three-dimensional audio can cut a pilot's reaction time by more than half. Also, pilots often hear several conversations at once. With chatter coming from different locations in space, he or she can more easily differentiate the sound. Physiologists know that 3D audio works. What they don't know is how it works during the gut-wrenching environment of aerial combat. This is where the centrifuge comes in. Omar Vicken and other volunteers have recently been exploring the use of 3D sound at high G forces. This introduces a whole new set of challenges. First, doctors aren't sure how multiple G forces affect the ear. And second, if an airplane is accelerating and turning rapidly, the origin of the sound actually moves in relation to the pilot.
We're just trying to understand the brain and ear mechanisms and how they're influenced by these changing forces. The next step, we hope, would be to actually apply the research a little more and insert that 3D sound into a flight simulator scenario, which we are capable of doing here, and give it one of those situations like I described. It's attached to a missile, or it's attached to a tanker, or it's attached to a tower on the ground, and you're using it to navigate, or you're using it to evade, and see if people are more successful at evading or navigating when they have the 3D sound.
In general, the more information a pilot is given, the better. But too much information is counterproductive. The key is how the pilot gets the information. This flight simulator is called the Synthesized Immersion Research Environment, or SIRE. Its goal is to explore the pilot-aircraft interface of the future. The challenge isn't helping the pilot understand his airplane. It's to make the airplane understand the pilot.
When you sit in your automobile and you're driving around, the automobile has no idea what state of mind you're in. It has no idea what your mental state is, what your physical capacities are. It has really no idea if you're conscious or unconscious. Our current modern aircraft have the same situation. The aircraft does not know anything about the pilot's capabilities. It doesn't know anything about the pilot's state. It actually doesn't even know if the pilot's in the seat or not. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to put some intelligence inside the avionics system so that it will be able to better aid the pilot, or in the automobile example, to better aid the driver when that driver needs aiding.
Having an airplane learn about its pilot seems to draw from the realm of science fiction, but the process is not unlike common medical practice. Inputs keep track of various physiological signals. It monitors breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, brainwave frequency, even the number of times the pilot blinks an eye. The avionics software takes all of the signals and combines them into an overall tally called mental workload. Here, the pilot is in a dogfight with a MiG-29. Now his vital signs are showing more activity. His breathing and heart rate have increased. The airplane is actually being told that the pilot is nervous. Because he's nervous, it can change the way it gives the pilot information. The flight computer can assume he's in a dogfight, or perhaps just flying low and fast. To compensate, it can give the pilot information he needs over the earphones, so he doesn't need to take his eyes off the enemy plane. The SIRE cockpit not only finds the best way of telling pilots what's going on, but it explores alternate means of controlling an aircraft. The technologies include three-dimensional audio, helmet-mounted displays, and something called a data glove.
If I put this glove on, you can see that the have a wrist sensor here that allows us to measure the glove inside of 3 space, so it tells us where the glove is with respect to a central reference point. And then the glove itself gives us joint angles from each finger. So at this point, we're able to tell gestures and where those gestures are being made inside the crew station. Now, with this kind of technology, what we can do is develop a virtual stick, for instance, which allows us to make a gesture inside the crew station, which might be something like grabbing the stick, and the stick then comes from wherever it is in the crew station to where my hand is. Then I can move the stick back and forth. I can actually make control gestures. So this has potential benefit for crew stations that maybe a control stick is non-functional, or maybe a pilot has had an injury to one arm or the other. He or she could actually fly the aircraft with a virtual stick.
Some of these technologies may soon find their way into airplanes. The French government is closely involved with the laboratory designing a new helmet-mounted display for its Rafale fighter. Other ideas, like the data glove and brain-actuated controls, will take time to perfect.
If we can foresee kind of in the future, what we'd like to see is take this work that we're doing, which is really exploratory in nature, and have it go forward by evaluating the benefits to overall weapon system performance here inside a flight simulation. If these devices and these concepts show merit inside a flight simulation, what we'd like to see is them be transitioned into an acquisition program, and in 10 or 15 or 20 years, we could start to see them appear in aircraft of that era.
The Sire simulator isn't just used for aircraft. The system can portray anything made on a general-purpose graphic system, from the interior of the human body to the surface of Mars. The virtual environment is limitless. The key to Sire is the interaction between man and machine.
The idea of measuring the operator state is going to have a potentially profound impact on human-computer interaction. When you sit down in front of your home computer and get ready to do some work, your home computer doesn't know anything about what your state is. It doesn't know really anything about your capabilities. It treats you very much like the last person that sat down in front of your computer. And so really, the types of technologies that we're developing for future aircraft have some use in many other areas of life where we're looking at humans and how they deal with complex machines.
The F-22 Raptor has 3 combined advantages which set it apart from any fighter in the world. The first is stealth. The second is supercruise. The third is information. The Raptor's avionics system changes how information is acquired and displayed, revolutionizing the way fighter pilots go to war. Test pilot Paul Metz knows this better than anybody. He's taken the F-22 into combat hundreds of times without ever leaving the ground.
This simulator represents one of the 4 types of simulators I'd use on a regular basis to evaluate an airplane like the F-22. It's called a weapons system simulator, and its purpose is to use the sensors and the weapons that are in the actual aircraft and allow the pilot to fly and fight and determine if the displays are adequate for the job. Let's take a look at that right now. Okay, we picked up, looks like 6 bandits out about 60 miles. I'm going to go ahead and put them in the shoot list, ask my wingman to pick up the rest of the bandits.
The F-22's aircraft recognition software not only displays hostile fighters, it tells him they're Russian Su-27 flankers. But this information isn't coming from his own radar. To remain stealthy, Paul will keep his radar turned off the entire time. All his information is picked up by his wingman 30 miles behind. The wingman is sweeping the sky with his radar and transmitting it up to Paul through a secure data link. The enemy fighters can see the radar coming from Paul's wingman. What they can't see is Paul, 30 miles in front and closing fast. The F-22 Raptor is stealthiest when it flies directly into enemy radar. If it turns abruptly, it may show up, but the hostile planes aren't ready for a dogfight. They'll continue undaunted towards the only plane they can see. They have no idea that they're now within missile range of Paul.
But stealth is protecting us. I'm going to go ahead and push the power up and run into Supercruise. I've got to shoot on the #1 man. He is not able to reach us at this time, so he can't see us, he can't launch. We're locked, and we've got a shoot cue, so we'll let the first weapon away. It's on its way. We step to the #2 man. We've got to shoot on #2, and that weapon is away. We'll step to our 3rd man in the shoot list. We've got a shoot cue on him. Weapons away on #3.
If these tactics work as planned, the fight will be over before the hostile planes know what hit them. The entire battle is a long way from the legendary aerial duels of World Wars I and II. Advancements in communication and stealth have forever changed the nature of the dogfight. It's a technological battle won by a pilot the enemy never even saw. In a way, it doesn't seem like a fair fight, but that's exactly what the U.S. Air Force is looking for. Back in Russia, Yevgeny Frolov prepares for another wild ride in his Sukhoi 37. The future of air combat may be the impersonal world of stealth and digital technology. But until the future arrives, fighter pilots around the world will watch Yevgeny Frolov's aerial ballet with a mixture of awe and apprehension.
I am not very familiar with the F-22 because the Americans are keeping the vital information a secret. But I think American designers are moving in the right direction. Life will show if it's a good airplane or not.
The F-22 is due to enter service in the year 2004. Already, Air Force planners seem confident they have a good airplane.
Air power has come of age. There was a time when I was in Vietnam when you could throw hundreds of sorties at a bridge, like the Phan Hoa Bridge, and all you did was make craters around the approaches to either end. With the current generation of airplanes and the precision munitions and the stealth that our Air Force will bring to this country's national security interests in the next century, we'll be able to take on any target anywhere in the world and do it successfully.